Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast.
Where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social, emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. Welcome to episode 8, All I Got Is You, Developing Family Partnerships. Obviously, we know families are a huge part of our kids' lives. It's maybe like a ridiculous understatement, I guess, that I just made. But I think that when we're not working with the families all the time, like we're working with the kid all the time. We see him right in front of us every day. I think sometimes we can forget about that family aspect and kind of what that looks like and why it's so important and just all that goes into making that kind of partnership work, right?
Yeah, we have to get families to start working with us. Think about everything we know about trauma and ACEs that impact kids. And if we want to see consistency and stability in a kid's life beyond the time they're with us, we have to get families on board and help and support and coach them as well.
Yeah. So why is this so important? I mean, I guess you started answering that a little bit already, but like why is it such an important part of this educational process for our kids to have the parents on board and have them understanding?
Yeah, I think kids need to know that this is important. Education is important. That's valuable, and that comes from a belief system at home, right?
Sure.
Just to go back to just research again, the CDC research says once you have high parent engagement in schools, that's closely linked to better student behavior, higher academic achievement, and enhanced social skills. Parent engagement also makes it more likely that children and adolescents will avoid unhealthy behaviors such as sexual risk behaviors and substance abuse. So that partnership essentially...
Yeah, crazy important.
It's
right?
essential if we want to see academic and behavioral success. We have to get parents on board.
Yeah. I just kept thinking, too, like the families obviously are more than half the equation, like parents and things like that. They're more than half the equation. We see kids for a certain amount of time. They see kids for more time than that, right? Once you start counting in just like the everydayness and weekends and everything else, like just pure time, we see kids a lot. Families are obviously that other more than half of that equation. I think if we're looking for like a maximum impact, like on kids, one of the things I kept thinking about as well is that's the best way because I can impact a kid for this school year. You know, I can do great with them while they're, in my class. Like I can do all kinds of stuff for them then. But if I want to have more of a lasting impact, if I can reach the families and also help the families along, then I actually keep helping that kid for years to come through having helped their family. Like that lasting impact continues to be there, hopefully. And not that to say that it's not there at all if I don't impact the family or don't work with the family closely, but I think it just increases it if I'm in a really close relationship kind of with that family or a good, healthy relationship with that family.
Yeah. And who knows that child better than
Sure.
their parent, right?
Absolutely.
That a lot of times we're not telling them anything that they don't already know or haven't had better insight or have known what has been tried or has worked for their kid.
Yeah.
And obviously, and are a great advocate for their child.
Yeah. So I think if we run into issues or if there are things that we have questions about or tough times come along for any given student, that's going to pay off so much. Again, this seems so obvious, but I think sometimes we forget that piece. We can get really stuck in the mindset that like we have to figure out the problem like just on our own at school, at work, and we're not going to necessarily reach out when there's a wealth of knowledge about that student just with the parent.
Yeah, and it seems such a simple and easy thing to do, but I know it's another thing for teachers to do. It's one more time commitment.
Yeah, it takes time.
But if we put a little bit of work in the front end, it will pay off because it's building trust with families. And when we talked about those components of a relationship, that consistent, steady person that you can trust,
yeah,
parents are looking for that in their educator. They want to know that their kids are loved, that you have their back, that you're here to support them, and that they can trust you. And once you put some work in the front end, it will pay off for the whole entire school year.
Yeah.
So when you do have to have that conversation, it's easy with a family, and the parent trusts you to make those decisions at school with their child.
Yeah.
But it takes a little work in the front end to do that.
Yeah. They believe that you actually have their kids' best interest in mind. Because I think that's, as parents, both of us are parents, with kids in school. And I think that's always one of the questions, as even minor things come up. or mundane things come up, you know, like, well, does this teacher really care that much? Or, you know, I've got like a middle schooler now, like seeing all kinds of teachers, and I'm like, how invested is this person really in, you know, in my daughter? Like how much do they really care? Or is she just like, you know, somebody that's being herded through, you know, like everybody else? So I think when you can have those touch points of like what, you know, of interaction, I think those are super helpful. And again, luckily, like our daughter requires very little interaction, you know, as far as, you know, any issues or anything like that she's having, but to know that there are people that care, and there are people that are willing to like reach out to us and like point things out to us, or work with her in different ways. I think that's just super important. It's really comforting as a parent on that side of the coin. And then again, as a teacher, I think that it's what we should be doing anyway. Like if we're just seeing kids on our parents on conference night, and
That's it.
And like every now and again we send something home, like, or whatever, you know, like that's not really enough. And then we shouldn't be surprised, like you said, if something does come up, even if it's not like the end of the world kind of stuff, like we shouldn't be surprised that people are, you know, potentially kind of jarred initially when they're like, oh, like the teacher's calling, like what, like something bad has happened. Well, if we're not having those consistent kind of interactions, then that's gonna probably be what people assume.
And I think as a school administrator, the one thing I don't want to hear a parent call me and say, I found this out, I never heard from the teacher.
Yeah.
Or I call, this is the first time I've ever heard about this. We don't want that to be the interactions we have with our families.
Yeah.
And I think we just keep
it seems more intense.
We should be encouraging educators to go back, and they should be the first front line of communication. It should not be coming from those pop out people, right? The people that are outside the classroom, it should be coming from you as the educator first. In my classroom, these are things that I've noticed, and creating some systems in place that you are the first line of communication home.
Yeah. Yeah. The person that's actually working with the kid the most.
And knows them the best.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So what are some ways we go about creating some of these meaningful relationships with families, with parents?
Yeah. I have always, and one thing as I've mentored or had student teachers and those kind of things over my career, one thing I always tell them when you interact with families is what they want to know. My kid's loved, you like them, and they're happy at school.
Yeah.
Everything else will come, right? As a parent, that's what I want to hear. My kid's happy. I feel like their teacher likes them, and that they ultimately have that trusted adult that's going to be consistent for them there at school. So once you buy into that, so that's the first thing that parents need to feel from the educator, that if we're calling home and the only conversation we're having is a negative, I'm just calling to let you know they did whatever. We've got to be just as mindful of the positive phone calls, and it really should be the first phone call home, or the first communication, or the first interaction. Yeah. It shouldn't be, I just want to tell you what happened at school today. And I think it's the way we phrase things too. If parents had the answer, we talk about this all the time, parents had the answer, they've already fixed it. Yeah. So calling to tell them how bad their kid is, or like they're constantly doing stuff, not that we don't want to communicate with them, but we can't expect parents to be the answer to fix the behavior.
Yeah.
They often are also, if you really talk to parents, they're struggling too. Yeah. I'm struggling as a parent sometimes where I don't have the answers, and I need somebody to help coach and talk it through with me.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of community resources to doing that. So by default, schools are the community resource for families, even outside the school setting.
Yeah. I think in so much of that's that empathy piece, right? We talk about that a lot with kids, rightfully so. But I think that empathy plays a big part with parents as well, like trying to put ourselves in their shoes. And then depending on the situation, right? Like you've got kids that are maybe like one-off, like, oh, they had a problem. If we're going to talk about like this in that regard, like, right. They maybe the student had a problem, but they've been fine all year. I think that there's a way to approach that still is very, very much framed in, hey, like I'm calling because I'm concerned, not necessarily because I want you to go do something about it.
I want you to take their iPad away for the whole weekend or whatever.
I need to hear all the ways that you're punishing them at home, because like now I'm trying to stick it to that kid, you know, like, so now I'm going to call your parent. Like it's always needs to be from a place of concern, of like, hey, listen, this is not ordinary that so-and-so is doing this. And I just want to call and let you know, and just see if you've noticed anything weird at home, or like, is there anything that, you know, you can think of that would have caused that kind of reaction or whatever else, as opposed to just framing it as like what the problem is. I think that's important.
Yeah, really being in tune. It goes back to those relationships with your kids, being in tune with knowing the kids well enough to know when they're a little off,
Yeah.
and then having those conversations with families. I would say many of the times when we have those conversations, like, oh, well, dad just moved out, or our family,
Sure.
the brother's been in crisis, or we've actually are without a car right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, all those things are
Crazy sick. Everybody's
grandpa
been
just
running.
grandpa just got diagnosed with cancer. So
Yeah.
our family rhythm's a little bit off. Talk about the
Yeah.
regulated home. Our family rhythm's been off. We haven't had a lot of time. Or we're in hockey 6 nights a week.
Yeah.
Our family has not been home. We've never had that low key. So you think about the family constantly
Time to like reset. Yeah.
We're like, and the brothers got stuff going on, and our family's just go, go, go all the time. And so I think they're tired.
Yeah.
I mean, if we really dive into that, a lot of that comes back to just some environmental factors for children.
Yeah.
That something's not consistent or stable. And so now I'm going to act a little different because I don't feel that safe.
I had a kid at one point in my career, and they were like, "Well, we got a new dog. It's like a puppy, right?" And so because this kid was sleeping, I was like, "What in the world?" I was like, "This is not really his move to actually go to sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep, like might check out every now and again, but like he's not like knocked out."
Yeah.
And come to find out they got a puppy, and like the puppy was maybe I can't remember if the puppy
Crying
was
and whining.
yeah,
Yeah.
staying in his room or not, but like it was a puppy, and so it was keeping him up, and I'm sure he was all excited, and you have so he wasn't sleeping well, and we're like, oh, okay, like well
Yeah.
that makes sense. It turns out it's not a some detrimental change in life. It was just this puppy will ride it out for a couple weeks, and I'm sure he'll get used to having the puppy there.
Yeah.
I think time too, like there's no, creating these meaningful family relationships.
Mm-hmm.
There's no substitute for time. And so in a classroom, in a bigger classroom, I've always worked in much smaller classrooms. That's just always been my reality. So I have a much easier time of kind of reaching out, pretty consistently to every single parent I've got and having some kind of interaction. How does that look a little bit more like, how have you before kind of made sure each parent is getting time, with you, that you're being able to talk to them?
I think when we talk about this relationship practice back to our classroom setting, same thing with families. Not every kid or every family is going to need a lot of that one-on-one development time.
So it doesn't have to be equal. You don't have to like spread your time out equally amongst all 20 families.
That would be impossible, right?
Sure.
Because most families come to school believing that educators are there for the best. They've had great school experiences. They love the school system they're in. The ones you need to spend more time with, just like kids, are the ones that do not trust the school system, that have had a bad experience, that maybe have a kid that needs a little extra help and support.
Yeah.
Those are the families you're going to spend extended time with compared to some of the other ones. Not that you don't give the other families time and attention. And just the way I did it as a classroom teacher is I blogged for my family. So just like a quick picture, here's some things we did today, talk to your kid about it. So they felt like they had like a view of what was going on in the classroom, to have some kind of feel part of the rhythm of the classroom. So they had some consistency of communication.
Yeah. That day-to-day kind of.
I did a lot of project-based learning. And so families are like, how can you help and support this? And every family's ability or capacity to help and support projects, but giving opportunities for families to come into the classroom and be a part of the education and partner with you. Amazing turnout every single time I've done it. People, even at different various levels, have been able to come in and I can offer this expertise. I can offer these funds. I'll come and volunteer. I'll help support. I'll come to the family night, right? Those regular practices are good for the classroom, but then you're going to have a couple kids where I might send a note home every day. I'm going to talk to mom on the phone. Well, I have I have texting on a regular basis, right? So that's your boundaries and where you're going to set those as an educator. But those are some things that some families I just had a different relationship with, where we were on a first name basis back and forth. But that's what that kid needed to be successful that year.
Sure.
And I don't want people to hear that and say, I've got to give a mile all the time.
Yeah.
Because I do think there's boundaries, right? We can't go in and parent for people.
Sure.
We can't fix some really tough family situations. This is where I have struggled big time. I've been good about like resetting my boundaries, but because it's really easy to go in, well, I'll just go do 4, or I'll just take care of this one thing. But really, our community services, you need to let families learn where resources are, how to coach and support. But going in to fix it this one time is not going to fix a generational systematic issue within a family structure.
Yeah, we have to be partners and resources, right, for those families. Because as much as we can have impact that lasts years, we're also not going to always be there, right? And I think that's important to remember. Like, we can't set up a system where somebody necessarily completely relies on us. That's never the goal, right? The goal is to set up systems that help people to continue to be successful, whether that's our students or how our parents interact with schools and with the next teachers moving forward.
Yeah.
You know,
And maybe one of our greatest needs for our school districts right now is to have those community resources partnerships. Because so many families, I think, came really apparent through the pandemic, don't have regular food sources, don't have electricity, have some really things that I talk about equity. I have never walked in those shoes to even know how to find that for you.
Sure.
I will go look and try to provide those resources, but I think at some capacity we've got to set up some social work systems, because schools end up being default that for families, but create systems where educators have tools and resources to resource out those things for families to help and support them.
So kind of along those same lines, what are some of these other like kind of obstacles in building these partnerships with families that you've come across? Because sometimes there are families that have had negative interactions with schools, or are naturally distrustful, or just maybe are a little bit more apprehensive to engage in any kind of positive relationship, but yet also at the same time maybe have a student that has higher needs, and we're required to try to interact with them more. What are some of the obstacles that you think that we come across most frequently in those relationships?
Yeah, I did a little research on this too. Just some barriers according to like a PTA organization. Did some research on why we don't have high family engagement. Even in like good communities, I feel like the PTOs and PTAs are the same 8 parents, right?
Yeah, sure.
You look at a school
you have
capacity.
like a real high involvement from some, and
then the other families just engaged. So some things is time, language barriers, or feeling like they can have the same vocabulary and language of the school culture, lack of knowledge about events or things that are going on, inconvenience, just the busyness of life, and lack of motivation at times of like, I'm already working really hard at home. Now you want me to go help the school and all the other kids. I think some other things we've encountered is I feel like sometimes families feel like we're calling to say it's your fault.
yes.
And I think we have been really mindful of calling like, nothing's wrong. I don't need you to do anything.
Yeah.
You do not need to fix this, but I just want to let you know this happened today and we've got it. I just want you to be aware. I think we both preference conversations many times like that.
Yeah, because the phone rings and you see it's your school's number, like you immediately are going to worry that something's going on, whether it's my kid's hurt, or like they need me up there for some reason, or we're in lockdown for some. I mean, right? Our minds are going to a lot of times go to like the worst case scenario really quickly. And so, or like they're in trouble again every time the phone rings. You know, it's another
You need
thing
me to
about
come
like
get my kid
yeah.
again. I'm trying to work from home. You've called
Yeah.
me 3 times this week to pick them up early.
Yeah. You know, so there's this automatic assumption. And I think if we can start putting that to rest a little bit by how we interact, and by initially alleviating the fear, like, hey, everything's fine. I'm just calling to like pass on some information that I feel like is important for you to know as a parent. But I don't necessarily need you to like do or fix. I mean, you can do whatever, you know, you feel like is appropriate in this situation, but like, I don't need, like, that's not what I'm not requesting that of you.
Yeah.
And I think we struggle with that sometimes because we're like, oh, I've hit my wit's end, or I maybe don't know, like, I don't know, like I've tried a bunch of stuff and I don't know how to fix this myself. I don't know how to help this student. And so I'm going to just go to this and expect that the parent can figure it out. And I think that's, again, builds this, natural obstacle that either builds that obstacle, or it's the obstacle that's already there that we now have to kind of get rid of. We have to get rid of that obstacle, you know, because previous teachers have kind of set that up and created that situation. I also think we tend to, when there's a tough student, which I think like this is where it ultimately goes, right? Like the students that are not having very many issues and are really low key, we're not worried about interacting with their parents as much, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not usually like that's not the concern.
Usually there's systems in place where parents are like, oh my gosh, I'm so mortified, or like whatever.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
will talk to them and the behavior's extinguished like automatically, because they have the resiliency, the consistency, the relationships, the trust is already there.
Yeah.
But for the kids that do not have that,
Yeah.
The tough.
So then this is where I think we run into this problem of, again, a lot of expectation that you're going to fix it, which I think echoing what you said, like if they could fix it, their kid wouldn't be the kid that has kind of chronic issues behaviorally at school, right? Like if the parent had the answer, like they would have implemented. They weren't like holding out on us, like can't wait until they finally ask me. Like I know exactly how to fix this problem. Like that's not the case, right? But I think we sometimes assume that that is. And then I think in those situations, sometimes we can get a kid from like the previous grade, like or I had their brother, and so now like I know this other one's coming up, and we can almost automatically start reading the email or the text or the note. Like we read those things in like the worst tone. And that's not just a teacher thing. That's like an in general in life thing. I've read that that's how we automatically read emails or articles or whatever. We read text in the worst tone and like the most accusatory tone and things like that. And so sometimes parents can be asking, like I've run into this so many times, like where parents are asking the kind of really basic clarifying questions. And then I watch like people get super defensive on the school side. Because they're like, well, you're kind of like they're asking these questions to try to like show that I'm not doing something. I'm like, no, they just are looking for information. Like it's okay that they ask questions, but we get used to so many of our parents just accept that what we're doing is in the best interest of their kids. Mm-hmm. That when we have somebody asking us questions that are kind of challenging at times,
we get defensive.
We get super defensive, and I'm like, oh no, like we shouldn't get defensive. We need to just do our best to answer the questions and like engage. But then we get defensive, and then we come back with like a defensive answer, and now we have like a hostile interaction.
Two dysregulated people now, right?
Right.
And here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always encourage like those tough things. Don't ever. This is my admin advice. The tough conversations or things you have to call. You need to call on. Do not put that in an email.
Yeah.
Parents, a lot of times, if it's a situation you really feel like you need to call home on, chances are there needs to be some follow-up questions and conversations, and you need to call so the parent has the opportunity, and you can gauge your tone better when you call and deliver those messages.
Yeah.
So if you hear anything when you talk about families, phone calls or in-person conversations are always way better than putting something in writing because it doesn't give the open forum to answer and ask questions. Unless you're a really gifted, articulate writer, which I am not. I think Justin does a great job. He can like capture the whole moment in writing. But if you don't land there,
detailed,
I don't land there. So that's not a good strategy for me to use with families.
Yeah, I think so. Like part of that for me is just make sure that you're not reading emotion into something a parent is asking when there is not emotion there, or when there is not a accusation there. Like, don't assume that those are things that are happening. And then again, like I think you really just have to take the time to build that trust in a way that lets them know that you don't assume that they're like a neglectful parent.
Yeah, they need to hear it without judgment.
Yeah.
They really want to hear.
Easier way to say that, right?
Yeah, they want to feel like you're calling and judging. And I felt this, even about my own child, when she was having regulation issues in the classroom, and just hearing like in her preschool years, just like, oh, no, we don't do. But as a parent, it's hard not to feel, even when you're trying so hard, and that was not the teacher's intent. But sometimes I have to even step back and think like, okay, they're really saying we need help, or I need suggestions, or those kind of things, and not.
Yeah, another side of that too is like every school district is going to have students that have families that just have harder times, in any number of ways, right? We don't need to get into specifics, I guess, but I think it's super important too to hear when I talked about empathy, right? To approach them with empathy, not to hear like pity, because I think sometimes we can land there. And we land there and we're like, oh, but like this poor family's probably doing relatively okay. And like the kids feel like they're in a loved spot, but like maybe the family's just in tough times. But what other adults don't need is for now like the school that has it all together and the teacher that has it all together to like contact them and be like, oh, like let me help you because you're in this awful spot and clearly you can't take care of your kid.
Do you want to see something blow
like,
up really fast?
Good. Yeah. Don't do that. Like
that is offensive.
Yeah.
It's super offensive. And I've seen that happen where somebody will like, I signed you up for this food program. oh, I don't need the food program. I can feed my kids fine. You
Yeah.
assumed our biases told us
Yeah.
you live here, so you must not be able to feed your children.
Yeah.
That's
And
not a great place to land.
And again, I think approach wise, like there have been times that I think we've seen this where all of a sudden somebody is really offended, and we may know full well that they actually needed help, but because of whoever happened to approach them in a very like, oh, we know you need our help, and that we are going to be able to be the ones that provide this for you, instead of, hey, is there anything we can do for you? Here are some of the resources that we have that are available to all of the students of the school. We didn't like pick you out of a lineup and like, you're the one that needs help. We recognize that you're not cutting it as a parent, you know, or as a family, but to be like, hey, these are things that are available to everybody. Just curious if you're interested in any of them, let us know. You know, like those are two very different approaches. But instead of like, you're all of a sudden you just show up and there's like a bag of food in your kid's backpack and you're like, what? Why did you just assume that I needed this?
Hey, I just put the application for electricity support in your kid's book bag.
And it's filled out.
It's filled out for you. Yeah. Well, I don't need that help. Yeah, there's a fine line between helping and offending, and just think, put yourself in those shoes too.
Yeah.
And how that looks. And if you don't have, it goes back to the relationship. If you don't have the relationship with the family to even approach them, you can't even really go there.
All the more things are going to be read in the worst tone or in the most negative tone, or they're going to be heard even in the worst tone or the most negative tone. And that's just not what we want to do. We don't want to drive more of a wedge, maybe even when there isn't one in the first place. So we just have to be very aware. Again, like empathy is that ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Pity is something very different, and that's not what, and nobody wants to have pity felt towards them. That's not a good feeling.
Yeah.
So what do you feel like families actually need from educators right now the most?
I feel like families really need to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. That they are a partnership in this education, and that we want that to walk with them. That this is something we're going to do with their children together. And really, I feel like, and how are we going to respond? I think families a lot of times, not unreasonable request, but sometimes it's like, I heard you. Sometimes I've really tried to be mindful and be like, I hear you saying this is important.
Sure.
Here's what, and really put intentional action in place. Because I feel like when people feel dismissed, they don't feel heard.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I feel like that's the part. And valuing, like, I hear what you're saying, and it's important to me that you're saying this, and count on me to do this part of it next.
Yeah, I think because there is so much talk about discipline and shifts in education, even curriculum, right? Depending on what state you're in, like it's like super hot button kind of thing. I think parents are worried a lot about like what's actually happening in a school. And I don't think that used to be the case nearly as much. I think there's an increase of that. I don't think social media does any favors with that, nor does our news, like in how our news cycles run. Because everybody's looking for a story and everybody's looking to do something that, you know, gets somebody fired up, I guess, in some way, or elicits the most reactions or clicks or whatever. But I think that parents are looking for like reassurance that nothing crazy is going on. I think that's really part of it. Like, I just want to know that it's like everything's kind of okay and normal. I also think that they are looking for education about like their own kids. I think that more and more as schools are shifting some, parents want to know what that looks like, because none of us were really raised that, you know, at this point, none of us were really raised having these approaches in school that are more trauma informed. There's not like the social emotional learning. We field questions about that. Like, what is it? You know, what is this thing that's going to happen? You know, people want to know, and rightfully so, because like, what are we teaching kids, and how are we interacting with them? So again, don't look at those as like a challenge from a parent, like you're doing it wrong, but like be willing to meet that again in a very regulated way with, this is like the information you're asking for. Let me explain it better. So, you know, but they want to know, like they want to know about their kids' brains, and they want to know how to, all of us do, right? As parents, like forget about the educator side of us for a minute. Like we want to know like how to best raise our kids, and that we're doing things right, that we're not screwing them up any more than what maybe we've already screwed them up, you know? Like we want to know those things. And I think all parents do. That's not, that's not just an education thing. That's where parents land.
Yeah, I think we hear that a lot. Like, I think someone asked us the other day, "Do you teach parenting classes?" We're like, "Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you want us to do that."
I don't know,
But
that's the best move, yeah.
but it is. It's a change in discipline policies. It's a change in regulation, or teaching kids about regulation in the brains. I think it's a shift for families. But I have had so many families say, I want to explain, like, we do restorative practice this year, and here's why, and here's how I'm going to handle this conflict.
Yeah.
Here's how I'm going to work with your child. And I always get a thank you for treating them that
Yes.
way, or responding in that approach. And I've never had a pushback in terms of a parent saying, thanks for loving my kid and teaching them.
Yeah. As opposed to like, hey, like a note that goes home that said, hey, we did like a restorative conversation with your son and this other boy.
Yeah.
And that's it. And they're like, well, what is a restorative? I mean, that like brings up a lot of questions, right?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, like, well, what does that mean? And that sounds
Yeah.
kind of hippie school are you guys going to? Like, why is our district all of a sudden doing this? But I think like the explanation of it and like walking people through what that actually means and educating parents, even in those like one-on-one conversations, is super important.
It sounds so much better than I'm suspending your kid for 3 days. You come get them. I want them out, and they can come back on Friday. And I actually don't have a plan to reintegrate them.
Yeah, they just have to come back.
Yeah, true. That's
figure it out.
And good luck with your work schedule the next 3 days,
Yeah.
or figuring out your own family. You guys might have already been stressed. That's why we're having behavior. But now I'm just gonna put you out of work.
Throw this in the mix.
Yeah, I'm gonna
too.
throw this out of the mix for you too. So, but I think it always lands so much better. So don't be afraid to have the conversations. It's knowing that you love somebody's kid is always received really well.
I agree. Well, what do you feel like you want people to walk away from this conversation? Like, what's their takeaway? What do you want them to walk away knowing?
Yeah, I think if you want to see a shift in students, that you have to create long-term impact, and you have to extend to those family partnerships, that as much as students need us, parents sometimes need us more than the kids.
Yeah.
There's parents that have been through generational things or in crisis because of family situations or dynamics that sometimes just need that consistent person to listen to. So sometimes part of our job is just listening to what's going on with the families. And that, remember, one size fits all is not, it does not work for families. Each kid, just like each kid, you need something different. Each family is going to need a different level of support and time and attention, and you just kind of have to figure that part out as you go and then kind of adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it was really two things. We break this rule all the time of like, what do we want? What's like the one thing we want people to walk away from? And then we like throw three things out there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do it again. So two things, like one thing is, again, like just to re-echo, like for those tough students that people have, if the parent had the answer, like we wouldn't be having the tough behaviors. So remember that. So it's not that you don't interact with them and don't keep them informed, but be very aware of not like making them feel like you're relying on them for the answer. Because if they had the answer, they'd already give it. Second thing, and this wasn't one that I was planning on talking about, but I thought about it as we were talking. So that's fun. Breaking from the notes. What? If we are going to expect parents to come to us and ask for how to approach kids, or how we're approaching kids, or what are best ways to help with their kid, things like that, we better be darn ready to be prepared ourselves to be the expert if people are going to look at us as an expert on kids. Mm-hmm. So that means you have to be willing, educators out there, you have to be willing to figure stuff out and train yourself and ask for the right trainings, or read the right books. Doesn't mean you have to spend all of your time only doing educational stuff, but you better have reasons behind what you're doing and to be able to talk through it, because just because I say so and just because I run my classroom, that stuff doesn't work anymore. And those explanations are not accepted anymore. So you better have reasons and explanations as to why. You better be doing what you need to do to be the expert if you want people to actually consider you to be somebody that's worth listening to about their kid.
Or they can believe and trust that your approach is the right approach for their kid. You have to have some backing to stand on when you do that. I agree. Just another call for districts to provide professional development so that educators do have the capacity, the vocabulary, the background knowledge when they are questioned by a parent on why did this happen in your classroom, or why did you approach this? Yeah. To be able to answer. There
are way fewer fired up parents that are like, why did you take this approach in ELA? On how you taught this poetry session. Then there are like why did you approach my son or daughter this way as far as their behavior and how they interact? Like,
Yeah.
there's one that principals get calls a lot about.
Yeah.
And there's one that they do not. And I can confidently guess, at least,
Yeah.
that it's not about the curriculum and it's not about the actual teaching of, academics. It has way more to do. All of those conversations have to do with behavior, interaction socially with their kid,
Yeah.
and like that whole aspect of their child, which again is 2/3 of kind of what we should be doing with kids
In the classrooms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, as always, we really appreciate you guys joining the conversation. It's a tough one, like about parents,
Yeah.
really. I mean, I think coming into a recording this one, we're like, oh, this one will be a kind of a lighter one. And I was like, I don't know that it was. Ultimately, like ended up being like, it's tough because it's tough to work with parents and tough to work with families and tough to do that in a way that creates partnership. But I think that's really like what we're wanting and what everybody wants is good partnerships between schools and teachers and parents.
Yeah, it's really rewarding too. I mean, from families that I've connected with, I know you have the same.
Yeah.
But families you stay in touch with and 10, 12 years later, you're still an important person in that family's.
Yeah. It's neat.
It's neat to see, and it's so rewarding once you establish those and the friendships and the connections that you make.
Yeah. Well, and you realize really quickly that you don't just change, hopefully, a kid's life potentially, but you have the ability to change a whole family's way of functioning and a whole family's life. And that's a lot of responsibility, but it's a lot of power. And I think that's why it's part of the conversation that we're having here today and that we want to keep having.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us in this conversation, and keep asking us questions, keep giving us feedback. We love all of that. And now let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.
Hey, everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.